Hello and welcome to the Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
Yes, we are.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. And we are so happy to come back to you and continue our conversation about dealing with anger.
Yes.
And we've been talking through that. Hey, thank you to every one of you that reach out to us. We frequently hear from people just write to encourage us, just to say, hey, we enjoyed that. We thought that was great. That was helpful, to share a personal story. And sometimes people even reach out with a prayer request, and we are not always able to necessarily, meet every person, talk to every person, but we can always pause and pray about your requests, so you can reach out to us about those. And we always just enjoy, especially answering your questions along the way. So, there's a ton of ways you can reach out to us. Bethlie and I are both on Facebook, Instagram. I have a Twitter account. And there's just a lot of opportunities. You can go to the keepingityoungpodcast.com and you can reach out to us via email from the contact at the bottom of the page, or right on the opening page. The moment it opens, you'll find a microphone down in their little right-hand corner there. Feel free to hit that microphone and just click on it and leave us a message. It'll come to us with your voice, with a voicemail. And we would love to hear from you. Reach out anytime. If we can serve you, help you, certainly we would be glad to do it. Can you believe that it's almost Christmas time?
Yay!
Just around the corner here. I hope you're shopping and getting a lot of that done. Our producer told us that many of you have been going to mypillow.com.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, many of you are being able to find some Christmas gifts on there with the promo code YOUNG. And you can even just log in there, mypillow.com/YOUNG. And we would just be so thankful if you would support our partners as they partner with us and support us as well. And we're very, very thankful for that.
And you will love their products too. Absolutely.
They have great products. Well, you ready to jump in here and get going?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, let's do it. We closed last week talking about our children. And we talked about just starting early to confront the issue of anger. And we reminded you that some children have a greater tendency to anger than others. Dr. Tim LaHaye says that everybody in the world either deals with anger or fear. Some people deal with both.
Yes.
And it is probably true that the number one besetting sin of many people is this emotional sin of anger. And often our parents didn't help us with it, so it's something we have to battle until the Lord sanctifies us, or we grow through it, or learn character. And fear is the same way. Some children never get angry, but they do deal with fear. But that's a whole other podcast, perhaps. But anger is a big one. And last week we left off talking about how can a mom, how can a dad help their younger children.
Yes.
And we're talking about predetermining. That was where we ended last week.
Yes.
Predetermining.
How we can help them when they first start showing those signs of getting angry.
Absolutely. And Bethlie said we use tone.
Yes.
We just pause. In fact, last week you said take their hands and pause.
Yes.
And for a moment there, my brain went to pause. It's like, take their little pause, but I think you meant Pause.
Yes, take their hands and pause.
And pause for a moment. And that one kind of cracked me up, but we were running out of time, so I didn't comment on it last week. But so we gotta slow down, and sometimes you have to force them. Younger children may need force, and you restrain them.
Right, not force as in you're not gonna, knock into them or anything.
Yes, but restraining them, and sometimes you have to be prepared for the long haul. You may have to sit your child down and say, you're going to sit right there until you are willing to say, I'm sorry, I got angry. And you say, but they sat there 5 hours. Well, then let them sit there 5 hours because you have to be willing. And if there comes a point that doesn't, work, you may have to give them a swat. You may have to take a moment and spank them and say, we do not respond this way. Remember that any kind of punishment is for the purpose of correcting behavior.
Right.
You're not angry. You're absolutely trying to get their attention so that they will correct a behavior. And God wants us to correct our children's behavior while they're young, so that it is not a devastating or damaging or detrimental issue when they're older.
Right. And I would say...
Did you notice I just had all D's there?
Oh,
just
I
off the top of my head. Devastating,
Wow.
detrimental, and damaging.
Wow, you are just amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, alliteration off the top of your head.
And I just totally made you lose your train of thought, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And so we're talking about restraining them and correcting them and punishing them.
Oh, yes.
And
I
being
was
wise
going
about
to
that.
say
Yes, ma'am.
that when you first notice the anger in your child, and it may start very, very young. We talked last week, it may start right on the changing table as you're trying to change their diaper. It may take a few years. They may be a little bit older. You may have a child who just seems to go with the flow and never seems to get angry. But when you first notice it, I would say as a mom that you do not right away strike out with corporal punishment with a SWAT. I would give them time to correct it. That's why we pause. We might have to restrain them, take their little hands, or actually hold them, or turn them to face you and look at them and say, no, we're not going to respond that way. Could you change that for me? Could you ask that more sweetly? Or you just stand right here or sit right here and let's calm down, and then we're going to address this situation again. So give them time to correct it. And then if they do not correct it, then it becomes an obedience issue.
Yeah. Now we're talking younger children here.
Yes.
And elementary age children, they are certainly going to need confrontation. They do need a calm response.
Yes.
Calmly responding to it. They need definite restraint, as in saying, you will not.
Yes.
That is unacceptable. You will not respond. And sometimes anger shows up when a child hits their parents.
Yes.
And if a child is hitting you because they've lost their temper, then you have to confront that very strongly.
Yes.
That is always unacceptable behavior. Anger that results in hitting from a 1-year-old will continue on unless you as a parent overcome that.
Right.
And you correct that. You let the child know that is not acceptable. And if a child continues, then you probably will have to give the child a SWAT, a punishment, a correction.
Right.
And as they get older, and they're, now they're in elementary school and they're getting older, you do have to definitely restrain them. You do have to come down harder on it the older they get.
Yes.
And so you predetermine how you're going to respond every single time that your child has an anger issue.
Right.
And it's a matter probably of just saying, look at me. Did I tell you what would happen if you became angry? And you may use spanking when they're younger. That may be something you have to do. It may mean that you would have to say, because you responded that way, you have to go to bed immediately after supper tonight. You lost your privilege to stay up. You have to go into bed immediately after supper because we are not going to respond in anger. Right. And so as an elementary age, if your child is elementary age, you have to work at this and then make sure you follow through. When you predetermine, here's one of the major issues of parenting in our generation. We are so busy. We are so distracted. We are on Facebook. We are watching an Instagram reel and we're in the middle of a movie and our child is behaving in a way that we know is not acceptable, but we're so distracted, we let it go. You have to move heaven and earth to say, wait a minute, this handling my child's anger is more important than finishing this movie.
Right.
Handling my child's anger is more important than watching this funny Instagram reel. And you just have to do it. And I read recently a child psychologist who was writing an excellent book on parenting. Bethlie and I are going to, in future episodes, go through his book and just do a book study of his book. But one of the things he said I thought was interesting, that when our children are 3 and 4 and older, they are thinking. And it is entirely appropriate when your child, reacts in anger inappropriately and it's wrong and it's wrong. It's entirely fine to immediately sit them down to where you must sit there and you predetermine how long, and then you deal with the anger later. So that as they're getting, they remember, and you remind them, remember when you did that this afternoon? Right. Because, and you don't have to announce it. You could say after supper, remember, when you did that this afternoon? Right. Okay, normally you get to watch a movie with mommy and daddy. Tonight, because of how you responded this afternoon, you can't. You have to go to your room and get in your bed, and the light has to be out, and you have to stay in bed. And so you find a way to help them to be reminded about, this is unacceptable. I can't continue to respond this way. Right. You're matter of fact about it.
Yes.
And yet you are very direct about it. So this is dealing with elementary age children.
Well, I would say even earlier with the follow through, if you have a toddler who has been hitting, who is dealing with things in anger, and let's say you go to a church where you put your child in the nursery, I would say to the nursery worker, there is something that we are dealing with. We're dealing with some anger. If my child reacts in anger, could you please page me so that I can come right away to deal with the problem? Because, as toddlers, they're going to forget by the time church is over. So that may be one way that you follow through. It could be if you have an elementary age child who is dealing with anger, you could have a conversation with their teacher and say, could you please just text me if they have a problem so that I can have a conversation with my child after school, so that there aren't those times when you're not together that your child's getting away with the anger and you're not able to deal with it.
I read one book in which the author said that as your child is getting older and learning how to write, you could send them to their room and they cannot come out of their room until they have written neatly, I will not respond in anger, and name the situation, and have them write it 100 times, and the next time 200 times, and the next time 400 times.
Oh my!
and what he said was that you have to make the results of their anger so negative that they decide, I will not respond that way again.
Right. It gives them pause before they respond.
So moms and dads,
anger.
you don't have to be frustrated with your children. And when you're frustrated, then you've got to make their frustration so big that they deal with it. Don't allow yourself to be frustrated. Frustrate them.
Yes.
In correcting this. And so here's a couple of other things we go through. Make no excuses. I think we've covered that. Make no excuses. Do not say, well, my child has, and name whatever diagnosis is popular in our culture. Make no excuses. And I say this gently. Even a child with, let's say, ADHD or what is now called ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. If your child legitimately has been diagnosed with something, anger is still wrong.
That's right.
And no matter what excuse you can make, well, our doctor said my child has this. You are still given by God the responsibility of correcting your child and helping your child, whatever disorder they've been given, whatever issue you think they may have. You are still called of God to train that child and help them to overcome the weakness of the sin nature.
Yes. And
so that's a matter of training as parents. And so you make corrections. You may have to take a loss of privileges. Maybe, they have to write 100 times. Maybe they have to go to bed immediately after supper. Maybe they cannot go to the birthday party this weekend. You have to make it so painful for them that they're willing to give. And that may be a spanking.
Yes.
And that may be a matter of saying, all right, I'm not mad at you, but you've continued to misbehave. And moms and dads, the point of this kind of training is that you want to correct their behavior in a sense while it's less important. Because a 3-year-old who has a temper, technically it's not the end of the world because they're 3 years of age.
Right.
But when they're 13, it's a big deal on a basketball court.
Yes.
When they're 33, it's a huge deal when it's their wife or their husband.
Yes.
Or a boss and they're getting fired, or a customer, or maybe they lose an account and here you are running a business, but your temper cost you a $500,000 account because you responded in temper to something that should have been handled more wisely.
Yes.
So better to take care of it when they're younger. And then I would say 2 more things here. Just a reminder, pray with your child about this.
Yes.
When you know this is an issue in their life, pray with them about it and say, God, will you help and pray with them in their presence.
Yes.
Help my son, my daughter to overcome their temper.
Yes, and ask them to pray that.
And then, ask them to pray with you.
Yes.
And then let's before we move to teenagers, let's talk about this, just about being practical.
Yes.
Sometimes in dealing with our children's anger, we can just be very practical. I put right away in my notes, they may just need more rest. Put them to bed earlier, get them more sleep.
Yes.
A child who is groggy and tired and hasn't slept well cannot control their emotions any more than we as adults can when we're running on little sleep and we're weary.
Yes.
So it might just be slow down, and get them rest.
It may also be that you need to control screen time. We know all the research that has been done, even as an adult. If you are looking at a screen right before bed, your brain does not turn off, and it is harder for you to go into a nice sleep. So if your child has access to screens, maybe an hour before bedtime or a half hour before bedtime, take those screens away and have just a calming time. Maybe read a story, and then all of the bedtime routines of brushing the teeth and going to the restroom and getting a drink and all the things like that. Make it more of a calm routine. I used to be very careful about our children. It just seemed like, especially the boys, right before bed, it was like, oh, we can wrestle, we can cause all kinds of chaos and start yelling and screaming and running through the house. And we tried really hard to make sure that they were calm right before bed so that they could get some rest, because that does affect their emotions if they don't get the rest.
And it can be as practical as the snack they eat before they go to bed.
Very true.
And so, slowing down, quiet, so time to be quiet. I noticed that, one of the things I've always appreciated about you and our family is the lighting. Mm-hmm. We use soft lighting at night in their bedroom rather than the bright overhead light.
Right.
We got a lamp beside their bed that
mm-hmm.
the room was already starting to be a little, not as bright. There's still light. You can still read a book. But it's quieter. It's a light. That light, makes
mm-hmm.
a difference.
It could be you might need to put some calming music on. Mm-hmm. Maybe your child is a little more high strung. So, and you may need to start way before bedtime instead of go. Oh my goodness, it's bedtime. Let's throw you in bed.
Do you remember the family at our church in Ohio that their children used to go to bed listening to my sermons?
Oh, yes.
And at first I thought that is so cool. And then it dawned on me, they're going to sleep listening to my sermons. My sermons put people to sleep. Mm. And that always was hard on me.
Do you need therapy?
I do, probably. Okay. You can kiss me afterwards. That's good therapy.
Oh, there we go. That'll be good therapy.
Your children need continual training. Now listen to this carefully. Your children need continual training on how to respond to various situations and demands.
Yes.
So when your child responds incorrectly to a sibling, mm-hmm. or incorrectly to you, or incorrectly to a teacher, or to an adult, or to a coach,
yes,
you never excuse that, laugh about that, ignore that. That mm-hmm. is an invitation for you to train. And you use communication mm-hmm. and maybe even role play. And you mm-hmm. say this, and I don't know how many times I've heard Bethlie say to our children, try that again. You know how you just said that to your sibling? Try that again. That is not how we say it. Say that again. Try that again. Try that again. Say it differently. Right. And what you're doing is you're teaching your child that there is a right way to respond to situations that are irritating or that are difficult or that you just don't prefer.
Right.
Right? And
yes.
So anything you would add to that, and then we'll move to the teenagers.
I have just been thinking that in our culture, again, we had talked about in the former episode about not being acceptable of any children's anger. But even in our culture, when our children do wrong, sometimes it is popular for you to blame someone else. So, it was the teacher's fault.
Oh, that's good. That's so,
why my child is so angry. It's the coach's fault. It's that other child's fault.
Or the referee's fault.
Or the ref's fault or anything like that. And so, you know what? Those other people may be wrong. And there's no doubt about it. All of us are fallible. All of us are sinful. And there could be something that is provoking your child. But you are not responsible for that other person. You are not responsible for that other child who may be provoking your child. You are responsible for your child. So instead of coming to your child's defense when they are getting angry, then you need to remove your child from that situation or talk to them later if they're an older child. And you need to say, you know what? They probably didn't handle that well. But you certainly didn't handle that well. And I do not have any jurisdiction over them. And if it's a coach or a teacher and you feel like they're being angry with your child and provoking them, then that may be a conversation you need to have with that adult, or maybe you need to have a conversation with another child's parents. But you just say to your child, look, I don't have jurisdiction over them. We might have a conversation, but I am responsible for you before God. And you will not respond that way.
That is so good, because our culture tends to automatically defend our children.
Yes.
If a ref calls a foul on our son or our daughter, we tend to get very angry at that ref. How dare he? If a teacher, I read in an article recently that most teachers absolutely dread or refuse calling parents about their children's behavior. And moms and dads, that's unacceptable. Our forefathers recognized the fact that as children, we had this unbelievable tendency to do wrong. And even if the authority had done our children wrong, we assumed that that was an opportunity for our children to develop character, not to develop a hatred for the person that did them wrong.
Right.
And that's why our forefathers would take the time, our parents in generations gone by would just assume that of course the teacher got on you because you were wrong.
Right.
And if a teacher had to call a parent and say, your child is misbehaving, it was rare, and the person who would not receive that, their children almost always were the troubled children who grew up to be troubled adults.
Yes.
But parents in our generation, I know I've told this story many times, and many of you have heard me preach, have heard me talk about how that when I was in elementary school, the teacher of our first grade class spanked the entire first grade class one day. She lined everybody up. And if any of you listen from Wartburg, Tennessee, you probably remember Mrs. Buxton. And she was a very famous first grade teacher in the high school there in Tennessee. And Mrs. Buxton lined us all up and paddled the entire class and then wrote a note home to our parents that she had to do that.
Right.
And I remember my dad spanked me when I got home because my dad said, you never should give your teacher a reason to have to spank you.
Right.
And Dad never called the teacher to find out, what did he do? Did he deserve it? Were you wrong?
Right.
Dad just assumed, you need character, son. And I know that you're a big enough sinner that probably she's right.
Yes.
So he just ran on that.
Yes.
And so what a reminder, moms and dads. I don't think, if someone is doing your child legitimately sinning against your child in the sense that they're abusing your child or hurting your child, that's not what we're talking about.
No. And you will know the difference.
You will know the difference.
Yes.
But just assume that if your child is getting in trouble, what a chance for you to teach character.
Yes.
To teach them how to respond to difficult situations. Don't agree with your child that the ref was an idiot. No, you teach your child that the ref is the authority. Right. It doesn't matter whether he was an idiot or not. You have to respond properly to that ref or you will not do well in life.
Right. I often, with our children, when we talk about authority, and there are times where authority misses something. They didn't know the whole situation. When you're talking about a ref cannot see the entire court or the entire ball field at one time. They just cannot. And they do miss things. And so when we talk with our children and they, might say, oh, I cannot believe such and such an authority did such and such. We just remind them, well, we're all sinners. We all miss things. All of us are fallible. None of us are perfect. And so how are you going to respond to that?
Right.
It's more important how you respond to that than that you fixate on how they did wrong.
Yeah, and help your children to see that when they are right and yet are done wrong, that's not a chance for you to go to work to make the situation right and force the other person to see it your way. That is a chance for you to recognize that many times in life you can be right and things still go wrong.
Yes.
Life is filled with opportunities for bad things to happen, for people not to see the whole story, for people to respond to you incorrectly.
Yes.
And when you respond to that wisely, Daniel's our go-to story here because Daniel was a teenager in Babylon. His mom and dad were likely killed in Jerusalem by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yes.
He has been, he's been dragged down to Babylon, and now he's under the authority of a pagan king.
Yeah.
And he wanted to honor God and do what was right. And it was amazing to me to read how that he appealed to the authorities in his life.
Right.
He didn't rebuke them. He didn't, take this, well, I can't believe you're making me do this, and I'm so angry that y'all have drugged me down here.
Right.
No, he submitted to their authority with a gentle spirit, and Daniel became one of the great characters of the Bible because he learned how to respond to authority and to difficult situations in gentleness, not in anger.
Yes.
And how to handle authority, even when authority was wrong, in gentleness and not in anger.
Right.
And it really just turned everything to a whole different direction. It's an amazing truth there.
Right.
So any other thoughts? We're going to just have to end here because we're running out of time. We'll do teenagers next week.
Yes.
Any other thought? Any ideas about?
I would just be careful, just on this whole idea of, oh, well, your child, if you're at a playground and you see, your child is responding in anger to another child, instead of saying, well, your child did such and such. If you feel like another child is pushing your child, maybe literally or figuratively,
Sure.
towards anger, then just say something calmly to the other parent and just say, you know what, we're going to go because you're not handling this well. And obviously, maybe his mama isn't going to get on to him. So we're going to remove ourselves from this situation instead of you responding in anger towards that other parent. Just be so careful about it, because parents, we are responsible for the children that God has given us. And it can be hard. It can be hard in this culture not to swallow the cultural lies of it's okay for them to be angry, or, well, you're the reason that they're angry. You are responsible to build character, godly character in that child's life.
And just as we close, remember that the Bible teaches, be angry and sin not. That is not an excuse for anger, because in the same chapter he says, let all anger and wrath be put away from you. Mm. The reminder is that all of us deal with these emotions.
Yes.
But if we learn to control these emotions wisely and carefully and respond to life with good emotions, it makes our life beautiful, makes us pleasant to be around. It enhances our marriage. It makes it better in raising our children. We just become a totally wonderful person if our emotions are what they ought to be. So moms and dads, we're talking about how to help your children handle their emotions. And if you haven't yet listened to the beginning of this series, we talked about how to help your marriage when there's anger issues in your marriage. And we have one more episode we want to talk to you about before we leave this idea of anger. We do want to talk on one more subject, and that is helping our teenagers who are battling anger.
Yes.
And that's a whole different ballgame. They're no longer children. And often teenagers deal with anger because of situations that they are facing.
Yes.
And so a lot to talk about. Join us next week, and we will continue our discussion, our conversation about anger. Of course, you're listening to Keeping It Young Podcasts. We hope to hear from you. Reach out to us if we can help you in any way. In the meantime, serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.